we talked about this program that we were going to do today, we were talking about how to be an ally, how to be an accomplice, and how that looks when we're talking about building spaces for people who look like us. So far and so often, we say things and it's constantly challenged, it's constantly questioned. So for example, when a black person calls out racism, I see a few people in the audience who have seen me deal with a lot of this in the last few days. Where we say something is racist and then a bunch of white people come in and say, well, tell me how it's racist. Explain to me for free why your blackness and your oppression that you're speaking from should be approved by my whiteness. That's a problem. So if you look at the picture, it should be to my right-hand side of me being arrested. That's at the Super Bowl protest when the Super Bowl came to Houston. We had 2,000 people attend that protest. And in the other picture, you see a teacup. The reason why these two pictures are together is if you've seen the movie Get Out, you know that the hypnosis of the teacup represents more than just hypnosis. It represents the invasion of space without say permission because of your curiosity and you're not being used to being told no. That's what the teacup means. So the teacup next to me being arrested at a protest is, Ashton, I want to come. Is it family safe? Is it going to be a peaceful protest? What is a peaceful protest?
Never.
Define a peaceful protest for a black person who is descended from people who have been oppressed for 400 plus years on this land. Some of us indigenous, I might add. So, y'all finished reading the quote yet? Y'all internalize it? Well, let me make it clear. Black Lives Matter is about teaching black people that Black Lives Matter. I know that a lot of times when we say it, and people get mad and they say all lives matter. Well, here's the thing. We're not here to challenge what's in your mind as a racist, right? We're not here to challenge what's in your mind as a white person. Actually, I'm more concerned about everything that people mention because it's the very thing that we're dealing with in Houston. Black Lives Matter Houston is working on so many projects right now. Right now, we're in the middle of raising $10,000 for a funeral for Stephen Ray, who got murdered the same week as Stephon Clark in Houston by the Houston Police Department. HISD is getting ready to close if they don't close 10 predominantly black schools to save the entire the ISD. We got a mayor who won't address racial issues and criminalizing the homeless. We have a lot of things that are systemic and institutional as opposed to just the we don't like or trust police. We're talking about systemic oppression that is the foundation of what the police are able to do. Right? So no one ever thinks about it like this. But we don't just protest, we educate ourselves, we teach ourselves, and we love on ourselves. And that requires the building of tables without the assistance or big I interference. Because a lot of times it's not about the assistance, it's really about the interference. It's about when we say we want to build our own table, and you feel the need to have an input on how we build our table without us consulting or asking you. You just feel the need to do it, right? And don't take this wrong as an audience, but think about this for a second. We've all done it. I've done it as a man in terms of speaking to a woman. I've had to learn how to check my male privilege, just like a lot of you need to learn how to check your white privilege. Everybody has some form of a privilege that we need to check. And in order to do that, we have to recognize and accept how systems work and be open to listening as opposed to having 99, questions? A lot of problems to be solved, and I mean, I'm not representative of the entirety of the African diaspora in the United States of America. Okay? So don't treat everybody as if it's a big monolith. Blackness in and of itself is a diaspora. And there are a lot of things within our culture and within our communities that we have to deal with on our own without unsaid interference. Clear? So, we're gonna, again, peaceful protest. Everything you see here. The picture of me in the black at the bottom, that picture right there is right after the Orlando shooting. There was a City of Houston event. There were several thousand people in front of City Hall. Over to the left at the top, the day of the Orlando shooting, Black Lives Matter Houston organized this event. I am also a part of the LGBTQ community. And I feel like the post-Orlando shooting was one of those moments where a white narrative can't control what happened. These were black and brown folks that were murdered, and what happens to black queer folk and brown queer folk and non-white queer folk, we usually get ignored by the people with the big equal sign, and subsequently everyone else. We don't get to speak for ourselves. So when we did that, that was about taking space back to feel safe, right? Because on one end, it's I need to be around people who look like me at least 3 times a week for entire 24-hour periods for me to be able to deal with a lot of the craziness that's going on. I'm also gay, so a lot of times I don't want to be around cis-het people all the time because I don't want to see y'all kissing and holding hands just like you don't want to see me kissing my man. I'm just being real with you. So when we talk about spaces, we're talking about spaces in a nuanced way where we exist as black in every single space. We exist as black everywhere we go. It's the first thing that people see, regardless of our sexual orientation and or gender identity. We need our space. Let me go ahead and get that next slide. So I want you to understand something here. These 3 pictures, they're from 3 different periods in the same city, Austin, except for the one on the right-hand side. The reason why I put these pictures here is because they were anti-Confederacy protests, MLK protests, and the thing that I've noticed in Texas, before I go anywhere else, about creating spaces for us, people always like to say what is or isn't an ally. No one, if you're building space so that we can survive and exist as black and brown people, that means that you can't always necessarily be in a space to audit what we're saying, to hear what we're saying, to get a sample of what we're saying, unless we invite you in. I think that's only fair, actually, because I know a lot of men who hate that there are women's only groups, but I think that's a great thing. Because men take up a lot of space, whether they're straight or gay. They take up a lot of space, and they don't know how to shut the hell up sometimes. And this is a simple fact. So when we're talking about tone policing, white tears, again, what the hell is a peaceful protest? Have you ever heard of a black person climbing up on a light pole after a baseball game? Flipping cars over? Let me give you a better example. A lot of y'all saw what happened when Freddie Gray got murdered in Baltimore, the protest that happened. I was there. You know why? I was here in D.C. You know what I was doing in D.C.? I was with a friend of mine by the name of Jim Obergefell, who won Obergefell v. Hodges that legalized gay marriage. I went to the Supreme Court and heard his case. He asked me to come. You know what I had to do? I left the Supreme Court and went to Baltimore on a MARC train. And a couple other ways I went to that protest. And you know what I saw? I saw when people were coming out of CVS, toilet paper, diapers, soap, toothpaste. No electronics, no CDs, no nothing. The buildings that were on fire had not been raised or anything since the last rise of the 60s. The remnants of what a lot of people saw, they thought they were burning down inhabited things. Really, to be honest with you, why would we destroy our own shit? We barely have anything, right? And when we're talking about, well, don't do this, don't do that, well, are you checking your Trump cousins that live 10 miles away from you when they're watching their baseball games and their basketball games and whatever sports they're playing and they get in the middle of the streets and fuck everything up? How can we have a double standard, right? We're talking about white tears, talking about the fact that if it doesn't happen to someone that looks like you have less sympathy. We have been asking for gun control for a very long time. Police sanctioned state violence, that's gun violence, right? Putting probation officers in schools, that is a form of intimidation by weapon. How many of you want your teacher to be armed when teaching your children? Maybe armed with school supplies, you know, better pay, insurance, space, not 30 students to a class, maybe 15. know, that type of thing. But unfortunately, we're living in a time where we actually have to re-up and put our money where our mouth is, dry our little white tears, pull our fucking pants up, and say what we're gonna do. We're gonna build tables and spaces and do the work that we should have been doing under Barack Obama when we all got comfortable. That's why. That's what the space needs to be. Let me go ahead and hit that next slide. So, if I wasn't clear before, you see the images. I have a lot of people who have showed up to protest on behalf of Black Lives Matter Houston saying that they're with Surge, with different organizations, and we do a lot of work with Surge in Houston, but there are people who will say that they're representative of organizations like they do with us. Because remember, Black Lives Matter is a thought, it is not intellectual property, and that belongs to anybody with black skin. Let's be real clear. So, just a disclaimer, don't be going around saying that everything is a Black Lives Matter protest, right? Everything is more than just a Black Lives Matter protest. It's a human rights protest for black lives. But never forget that when black people do well, everybody benefits from that. Yes. Everybody. I don't care where you are. So, don't be the unapologetically white people who come in and say, you're an ally, you've never done anything, you showed up to that one protest, you laid on the ground, took one picture, but you wouldn't get arrested for us. Because my accomplice friends, they'll stand between the police. Yeah. They'll show up to an event, and they'll link. And they'll train their white friends that come to the protest on what to and what not to do. They'll link. They'll link arms and stand in front of the police. And if you are not willing to do that, if you are not willing to fund bail, to do different things that are required to help people get up off the ground and do grassroots work, for example, like we did with Hurricane Harvey when it hit Houston. We raised a lot of money and we helped a lot of people. And right now there are people from BLM Houston working with West Street Recovery who have built space. And white accomplices are now coming in and helping to get permits, helping to buy supplies, and there are people whose houses are still being worked on to this day. And that's what the space looks like when you are an accomplice as opposed to a white ally. You're willing to put up what needs to be done, you're willing to sacrifice some things, and you're willing to teach other people how to do the same thing. Because if you're not checking your fellow white people, you are not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Period. So, in conclusion from me, and I'm going to bring Diane up, the little girl here, we did a March for Human Rights May of last year, and we have one coming up. And what we wanted to do was highlight blackness in all of its forms, right? We talked about immigration in Houston and in Texas in the context that we think about people who come from south of the border, but immigration is everywhere. There are Afro-Latinx folks. We're a part of every culture. We live everywhere that people exist. So if we can't talk about immigration in a more holistic form where we're talking about black and brown people who are in detention centers and being denied abortion, among other things, don't just look around, and they're not all from Mexico. There are several countries that speak Spanish, by the way. So everybody who speaks Spanish is not a Mexican, and Puerto Ricans are actual US citizens. Okay? So let me go ahead and bring Diane up. And remember, Lucy, this little girl took the megaphone and she had a lot to say. And the reason why we do what we do is for that little girl to not have to do what we had to do today.
Thank you. See, now I gotta follow everybody else. So thank you for that, Ashton. My name is Diane Burkholder, as you all know. I am excited to be here. This is a kind of a full circle moment for me. I spoke at the last Secular Social Justice Conference that happened in Houston, and that was my first opportunity to speak about my work in a secular sense. I think many of us that are engaged in this work happen to be secular, they're involved in social justice issues. It is not the focal point of the work, it is a piece of everything that we do. And so that was the first space where I was able to come to see mostly black and brown folk speaking to many different types of folk, but our experiences were in fact centered versus being, let's have the queer panel, let's have the brown panel, Let's have the woman panel, right? That it was centered in the work that we do. So I appreciate spaces like this. We're talking about creating spaces. When you go back home, think about how you can either, one, support spaces like this, or create spaces like this that aren't just tacking on different identities. So with that, my slide is up here. I actually can ask you a question before I don't know the one I got it. So everybody think about when you walked out of your door today, whether it was your home, whether it was a hotel, whether you were just getting off the flights. Think about when you stepped out of your space that you slept in and you walked out the door, how long it took for you to find somebody that looked like you. Think about if that felt different than it was the day before if you were traveling. Think about what that means when you go to your workplace. Do you see people that look like you? Think about what that means when you go to your school, when you visit your family, when you go to the airport, when you walked into this space today. As a person of color, as a queer, mixed race, Black person of color, I walk out the door every day and play my least favorite game. Count the people of color I see. And I live in a more and more gentrified neighborhood. And so the Black and brown folks that are on my street are slowly getting pushed out. And it is something that I think folk of color, and queer folk, we do this too. We see you, I see you walking out, I immediately count all the Black and brown folk. So my conversation today is to the non-white folk here. And I have to give a definition to what a person of color is. Person of color is if your people are not from Europe, you with us. I gotta say that because we have surge meetings showing up for racial justice. It's white folk talking to white folk. We have a POC accountability team. And every time we talk about having a POC breakout, there are always some melanated folk that stay in the white space. And that is internalized oppression. That is what white supremacy does to us as Black and brown folk. And I want to say too, as a mixed race person, I walk down the street and I'm a Black woman. People don't see a white woman, they say I'm a different type of Black, but I don't pass as whites. And so there may be you identify as mixed race and people perceive you as white, but you know your ancestry, and you know your people, what your family looks like, guess what? You're a person of color. You are white passing privilege, but if your heart tells you that you're a person of color and your identity and your culture as a person of color, I need you to own that. Don't do it for your colleagues, for your friends. I have many white passing friends that will sit in that space because people perceive them as whites. Go into the space for folk of color. Acknowledge that, yes, I'm white passing down. My ancestry is this. Do it for yourself, not for everybody else. And that takes time and practice and also lifting each other up in those spaces. So I'm not going to call somebody out in that space and be like, shh, I know you're brown. That is not my role to do that in front of everybody, because that's policing somebody else's identity in front of white folks. But on a side conversation, I'm like, you know what? I noticed this. Tell me more about it. And I have seen shifts happen, particularly the last couple of years, of more folk that are non-white claiming and being unapologetic, saying, this is what I need for myself. I will come back and join you at another time, but for these 10 minutes, for these 2 hours, for these 2 days, this is what I need to be whole. And if nothing else in this space, we are talking about creating and maintaining those spaces where we could just walk into a space and just be. We don't have to explain ourselves. We don't have to tell people to move or get out the way. We can be ourselves. And a good analogy is when you're in a relationship and you're having discussions, or with your friends, what do? You do your individual work first. We have to do our community work first before we go out and we come and go. So like relationship counseling, right? You do this by yourself and then you come together. We're not saying we don't want to work in the same space and do stuff, but we need to do our in-house work in order to do the work. So, with that, there's an article that I reference pretty often It's an Everyday Feminism article, 5 ways marginalized folk, particularly in the US, are gaslighting. How many of y'all have heard of the term gaslighting? Most people, right? We mostly think of the term gaslighting as regarding on interpersonal kind of one-on-one discussions, relationships, sometimes romantic relationships. The notion that when we're involved in conversations with somebody like, you're just being too sensitive, right? You're being too sensitive, you're being too emotional, right? This is very gendered as well, right? It's not that big of a deal, just calm down, it's okay. Quit being the angry, blah, 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 right? This happens to marginalized communities as a society. Just 2 examples that I pulled out were when you don't exist, the very notion of your lived reality, of what we do every day, doesn't really matter. We don't really, it's not that big of a deal. We're all part of the, the American people, the melting pot, the American dream, right? Your reality is you're American first. This country doesn't, I'm sorry, I know I'm American, but this country doesn't love us, doesn't love me. This country was rooted on genocide and slavery, right? Like, I'm American, kind of, right? So cultural gaslighting keeps, I'm going to read it from here. Cultural gaslighting keeps down communities and individuals by creating a dominant cultural narrative that not only excludes certain identities and practices, but leaves absolutely no room for the possibility of them existing. So we're talking about very fundamental things. You don't even deserve to have the space that you want to have. This leaves those who dare to believe the impossible in a constant state of doubt or constant state of being disbelieved. Right? How many times have you been in a space and someone's telling you, you don't really need that. You don't really need a break space. You don't really need to take a day off of work for mental health, right? You don't really need to go hang out with your girlfriends or with your family, right? It's not that big of a deal. Just suck it up, just keep on working, right? Telling us that our very identity does not matter. Another point is that, and I found this really true for me when I moved to Kansas City. I've been there for 7 years. I moved all around. And when I first got there, and I'm not saying this is just Kansas City, I think this is very indicative of many cities. When I first got there, I had a hard time finding community. I was like, where are the heathens? Where are the queerish folk? Where are the brown folk? Shit. I couldn't find anyone. And I was like scraping to find people. Oh, you have a similar experience. And it took me a full year to develop community. And I was having conversations not only with those that were new to Kansas City, but those that had born and raised there. And the same narrative came out of, I can't find my people. And I feel so lonely and isolated, and I feel such a deep sense of shame because I can't find them. I'm trying so hard, and I'm giving up, and I might want to move. I might want to leave my house. I might want to engage. And how that cycle keeps us down and doesn't connect us. And so although I'm a community organizer, I know it's like I've always operated in awkward spaces. I don't fit neatly into any box. I think most of us don't. So I try to put people together. And so I started like putting people together, community by community by community, and saying, you two chat. I might not have your same experience, but you two have a similar experience. And so that is one way we can help create space. You don't have to be there when they need, maybe introduce them, but let people develop those relationships. That is one of the biggest things we can do. If you are not even part of a community, say, hey, guess what? I know similar people, and don't just automatically connect all the black folk together. Let me put that on. Because y'all like, whoa, I know this black person, or all the queer people, you queer, we should get together. No, if you have a relationship with somebody, you know that they have some shared interests, then connect somebody, right? Not just off of their pure identities. But we're told that having the need for a family or a community is something that we should be ashamed of. And guess what? That's white supremacy. That is capitalism. Our current society teaches us that the only way in which you can mark your success is by isolating yourself from your family or community. Right? You go to college, you leave home, you get married, you have 2.3 children, and a dog, in the suburbs, you're white people, right? Like, you distance yourself. And any need to go back to family more than just the holidays or live with your family or talk to them all the time, particularly for marginalized communities, black and brown folk, we're told, you don't really need that. You need to be an individual. You need to be self-sufficient. You don't need to rely on those because that makes you weak right? And particularly for Jews, right? It tells people that we can't connect with one another. Community allows us to come together in a way that makes relying on the oppressive system unnecessary, effectively taking power away from the state and putting it back on people. So this is the reason why we're not really supposed to be out in the streets, right? If we have the collective unity, that is a threat to the powers that be. That is a threat to those that are telling us what we should and what we shouldn't do. And so whether you're out on the streets, I understand folks that are differently able, not able to get out there. Maybe you are undocumented, can't get out there. I understand there's many reasons. But there are ways that you connect to people online. There are ways you can have interpersonal conversations. I think a lot of the work I've been doing has really been thinking about, we have this big picture, we're trying to fight for liberation, but at the end of the day, it's about our interpersonal relationships and the strength of those. And the conversation is more recently coming up, and I think in my own life, is when stuff goes wrong with somebody we're collaborating with, we're really quick, there's this whole thing about call-out culture, and sometimes it's an organization that needs to happen. But we're having a one-on-one conversation with somebody, we're working with somebody with this deep relationship, and somebody does something wrong, and we're quick to block them. We're quick to not engage in a conversation. We just don't discard our family most of the time. Maybe after years and years of trauma and you're trying to work. Why are we getting rid of our own people that are fighting for the same shit we are? Because at the end of the day, guess what wins? White supremacist, capitalist, patriarchy. Because when I remove myself in a situation like this, happened to this, happened to this, because this person was aligning to whiteness, or to money, or to cis-hetero patriarchy, that shit plays out. And so, encourage, and we're talking about creating space, who are people that you're not in good relationship with? And we all have those people. What would it mean for you to just maybe say, hey, you know what, let's chat. It doesn't have to be an argument. Can we just chat? Can we just have coffee? There's some things on my mind. And if you don't come to a resolution, so be it. But you at least try to maintain a relationship. We are so quick to throw one another away. And guess what's winning at the end of the day? Our ego. Our ego is winning. The idea of, I can get access to this speaking gig. I can get access to this job. I can get access to this press. Right? When we're doing this work, think about who we're actually serving. If we're actually serving the community, we would try to maintain that relationship. Because guess what? The community feels that shit. They know when people are beefing. They know when people aren't working away. That's why so many people are leaving this atheist movement. Right? Because of the bullshit that's going on. Because white trolls are coming out, white dude bros are coming out of the woodworks, and people aren't collecting their cousins. Dudes in the room, whether you queer or straight, get your cousins. Every time some shit pops up, it's always the family, the queer folk that are coming to like save the day, and all the men are kind of quiet. Real quiet. I can think of a couple dudes off the top of my head that when the shit popped off at Skepticon 3 years ago, I'm looking at Greta because she was there witnessed it with me. There were a couple dudes that came and was like, you know what, this is some shit. And so I encourage you to have those conversations with one another to build up communities. So I have just a couple more minutes. So we're talking about, I see you. We're talking about how you create and maintain spaces. We're talking about physical spaces and virtual spaces. So I don't want to give like a laundry list, and I've mentioned this before in other talks. You have access to resources. The biggest thing, particularly as a community organizer space, if you have access to a space, a secular space, a conference room, you have access to the library because they charge, you have a big home, and you can host a meeting, guess what? Offer that. Offer access, because I will say that as an organizer in Kansas City, and most spaces are religious-based, I have a hard time finding spaces. And let people know, hey, and don't try to be there in the damn space when the meeting's going on. Open the door and be like, call me when you're done, right? Provide food. Help organize food. If people are doing, if you're putting on an event, like there's food here, right? Get together with your folks and be like, can you make this, can you do this? I have access here, right? At the end of the day, it's about the physical space, it's about the logistics to even get to that damn space. If there's an event for women, or for queer folk, or for folk of color, or for atheists, invite other people from that community, even if it's not you. If there's a space for a marginalized community, don't try to enter the space like Ashton said. And that actually happened. I was at Race, Sex, and Power. I recommend checking out. It's going on today. It happened yesterday and today in Chicago. And there was this POC space, and folks were talking about that white folks were in the POC space. But what the internalized piece is that black and brown folk were okay with the white people entering it. Oh, they're fine, they're here. Right? And so when that happens, black and brown folks, guess what? You call the other person, they're like, this is not okay. And as white folk, or as dudes, or as straight folk, when that happens, pull people aside and be like, guess what? We're here, come with me. We're gonna go do this work somewhere else. Last thing I'm gonna say, and I think this is happening more and more in spaces, in conferences. I really, one, encourage, I hate the term networking. Just, it feels very, thank you, corporate, capitalist, transactional. What do you got? What I need, right? Like, it's not helpful. Figure out ways to help develop authentic relationships. So Jessica gave us some ideas for like icebreakers, getting to know one another. When you're developing things like this, or even like a workshop, create a space intentionally where people create together. This is not helpful for us to just come and speak at you, right? I want to know a lot about everyone here. What are ways that you can develop like some working groups? What are ways that you can develop workshops within your spaces? Because I've been to so many secular spaces, and unless you're on the stage, unless I happen to sit next to you, I don't get to know who the hell is in the damn room. And I'm kind of extrovert, but I don't want to go up to random people like, hi, my name is so-and-so, to develop that into your programming. Another piece I recommend is caucusing. How many of y'all have been in a caucus before? Okay. So a caucus is a space, it's usually a breakout. The affinity group is another term. So it would be like all the women, all the queer folk, all the white folk, all the folk of color, all the black folk together. When I've had POC spaces, I've done a black space and non-black POC, right? Because there's many, Ashton's written a lot about the discussion of POC. Black and brown, anti-blackness happens in all communities. And sometimes black folks need their space, and non-black folk of color need to talk within your communities about how anti-blackness plays out. Pull those pieces out together, and then come back together and chat about it. And so what caucusing is, let's say this day is going on at the end of the day, we're gonna go caucus. And even if there's a space for religious folk, have folk go caucus 20, 30 minutes, have a loose conversation, have people get to know each other, and then come back in the bigger group and debrief, but don't give all the details of what happened, because that's a safe space. That is one critical thing you can do when you're building a space like this, when you're thinking about trying to do this work. I'm gonna close, because we're getting ready to wrap up. So, I gave you some tips. You saw Ashton, you saw me. Say hi to us. I encourage the black and brown folk here in particular. I'm gonna charge y'all. I'm looking at you with all my eyes. Everybody can see. Because I think this is probably one of the only spaces where you come and you see people that look like you, right? Especially that are heathen, that are secular. It can feel a little networky. Just go up and like slide your information to somebody. Be like, hey, I want to chat with you after. Because being in these spaces has helped me connect with other people that have, and then to be able to bring people up into leadership. I appreciate speaking. I'm not the only one. People ask me to speak on panels. I am 37 years old. I am not youth anymore. I'm tired of being asked on a panel. I'm like, you know I can be someone's mama, right? So if I develop those relationships and people ask me to speak on panel, I'm like, no, here are some other people, right? Create a leadership pipeline so it's just not us always talking. Y'all gonna get tired of seeing us, right? Secular social justice TV created that so new people could come up. And I've been around a couple of years speaking in heathen spaces, and I'm trying to find other folks like, hey, I'm not available, it's not good for me, I want somebody else to speak, right? Because it is very catchy for marginalized folk and secular folk, if you're speaking in other spaces, to be that one, to keep taking that claim to fame. What are ways that we are passing the baton, that we are bringing other folk up, and that we are providing guidance and not just throwing them out there. So those are my thoughts for today. I appreciate y'all. I look forward to chatting with y'all the rest of the day. I'm a little sleep deprived, so catch me in the morning because my caffeine's gonna wear off. And I want to thank Ashton for getting us started, and Jessica and Sakivu for this being here. This happened. When was your first one? 7 years ago? Huh? 2014, right? How far we've come in 4 years. This is the beginning of the moment. So thank you all for having us, and I'll see you out throughout the rest of